Hello and welcome to Neuromentoring. We are so glad you could join us.
I'm Lucy,
I'm Brian.
and together we explore what mentoring is in these neurodiverse spaces we call universities. Today's topic is the ebb and the flow of the mentoring year.
It's one of those.
Goosebumps.
It's one of those phrases I've been using all week. Is the whole idea of ebb and flow. And somebody stopped me and just said, "Brian, what are you on about? Ebb and flow." Lucy, define.
Ebb and flow, I think this is not a technical definition, but to me, ebb and flow is the peak and sort of the pits in terms of using energy. And I very much see it as ebb, sort of energy coming in, and then the flow, sort of how that continues. But again, that is not a definition. That is how I perceive
No,
it. What
it is.
What do you think?
It's like that. It's here. The ebb and flow of the ocean was the phrase that I always go to. Is the way that it sort of sometimes washes in and washes over us, and sometimes it goes back and it gives us more beach to have fun on. And it's
That
that
was such
kind
a much more articulate way of explaining the chaos that is in my head today.
yes, maybe it's because just for those of you who are listening to us, it is the beginning of term for us, and so we've just been subjected. That's the wrong word. We've suddenly had to meet lots of students and had to juggle so many more things as part of this big ebb and flow of the university year. And sometimes it leaves us a little bit adrift, a bit high on the beach, a little bit up there with the seaweed. Lucy, are you feeling a bit seaweedy at the moment?
Well, interesting you sort of asked. This September, I think I've mentioned it before, changed how I work with my neurodivergence rather than forcing myself, into what I thought I should be doing. And so far, so good. It's just managing changing timetables because usually the first couple of weeks are introductory modules, especially if you've got somebody moving on from undergraduate to postgraduate, or you've got sort of a new assumption to change course. So again, there's just a lot of learning, I think, for the mentors, for the study skills, for the tutors, all at the same time, and it's managing all of those changes in one go.
Yeah, and that's what we're. If we go back to that ocean metaphor, sometimes when the tide gets in and it hits a rock and it starts swirling around and around and around, and then on the way out, it kind of becomes this beautiful little trickle in its own right. That's the kind of ebb and flow of the year that we have in universities. For those of you who are outside of universities, there are some, I suppose, big markers. Lucy, going through the year, how would you characterize the year for students?
Do you know what? This year's been a little bit different in that so many more students are starting late September, early October. But then I do still have some students that have started at the beginning of September, or they've moved into their halls at the beginning of September, or they've got introductory stuff. So I would mark September from the sort of the first to the end of the month is a real period of transition for everybody, whether that's starting support, whether that's picking up support again, whether that's carrying on support, if they're a student that does have support between semesters. I think September for me is the first sort of, okay, this is where we're going to sort of find our way, navigate our way, and how this is going to be, how it's going to look. It's a real period of transition for everybody involved, I think.
Yeah. So we'll come back and we'll talk about this transition September. After transition September, what's the next thing in your mind?
Late October to November, the November crash.
Oh, the November crash is such a thing. We'll definitely talk about the November crash. After November crash, I really enjoy all the excitement about Christmas. And then students quite often head home. And if they get to touch base, that's wonderful. Then in January, what happens in January?
The January abyss. It's
Oh, no,
cold.
word
It's
for it.
miserable.
Yeah,
Christmas has been and gone. Oh no, we've
yeah,
got more assessments. We
yeah.
forgot about them. What are we going to do?
Now, the
And then
nice, oh, sorry, the nice thing that I think is coming out of that January, when you start to get into springtime, you get
yeah.
this little place of almost an island of calm before Easter. And there's something about good learning that goes on during that time, which I think is really important. There's definitely a time of growth that happens not just
Mm.
in springtime, but with the mentees that I've worked with for the years. And then comes Easter and the exams. Muhaha. there's that
Yeah.
constant flow. So we're going to talk away through it. Shall we start off with transition now that we've kind of introduced the big peaks? Lucy, how would you ensure a good transition happens for a student right in the beginning of the first years? If you had a little checklist, what would you give them?
I kind of, so if I'm thinking about a student that perhaps is starting with me in September, I kind of have from the very first session. I mean, if I'm able to, sometimes I do sort of some transition sessions. I mean, obviously, with all of the changes, sort of on the DSA side of things, not so many referrals have come through so earlier this year round, but I'm assuming it's just because of all the changes. But I generally try and do, okay, so what are your expectations? What have you got prepared? What would you like to, take part in? Sort of what's an overview of your week? It's fundamentally, forget sort of the academic barriers, it's the life barriers that you've got to help them navigate first, because for some students, this is the first time they've had to advocate for themselves. This is the first time, and of course, this isn't me generalizing, there are lots of different situations, but for a lot of first years especially, this is the first time they've had to manage their own lifestyle independently.
Deeply, that food in the tum-tum, roof over your head, a nice warm place to live, people to at least engage with to stop any pangs of loneliness.
Yeah.
A big change from moving away from home. And also that the thing that we very, very rarely talk about, the way to manage the pressure from parents to stay in contact. Now, I'm not saying to anyone, don't stay in contact, but actually parents can be a little bit demanding, and it stops that development of that sort of freedom of being at university by yourself.
Yeah.
Do you remember your first day at university?
So I think so. So I'd got packed. My parents came up. We unpacked. Then we went up for a bite to eat, and they went. And then all of a sudden, it hit me like, oh, I've got to do my own washing.
Mm.
And I think I've mentioned my first food shop before in a previous episode. But what did wise old Lucy? Wise old Lucy that had split up. She'd set a budget. She'd split up what she'd got, so she had a weekly allowance. That's all fine.
Yeah.
But what did Lucy spend her weekly £40 on?
I think I
Bearing
remember.
in mind, this is London.
Cheese.
It was cheese and eggs. What was wrong with me? So for a week, I ate cheese, eggs, and crackers because I thought, oh my God, I can buy anything I want. And Lucy of 2014, that was what she wanted at that time. Oh my gosh, 10 years ago. Oh my gosh.
Yes. Okay. So we're now talking of Brian of 1994, brought an awful lot of cider, unfortunately. He was not well behaved. The bit that really hit me, though, and this was talking about sort of the culture shock of coming to university. So 2 weeks before I went to university, I had been living in the Altiplano of La Paz, just outside of La Paz, up in Bolivia. And I'd spent the best part of a year working out in Bolivia and some time in Argentina as well. And the first time I walked into a shop to do my first student shop, I actually sat down on the floor and cried. I was a young man crying in a supermarket because there was so much to choose from. And it was that sudden overload of everything. And I probably hadn't been sleeping well, my own fault. I hadn't been eating at all well. I'd probably drunk a little bit too much a few too many nights. And it was the supermarket that got me. It was a place of barren sterility. It was the Summerfields on King's Road. And it was just, I felt with this huge sadness that there was too much to choose from.
See, for me, that moment came when kind of the noise. I'd had quite a regimented sort of routine up to this point, and sort of how sort of my parents' household was run. And then all of a sudden, there's noise at all hours. There's fire alarms going off when someone burns their pizza at 3 a.m. in the morning.
That would be me. I am so sorry.
There is
stuff I did.
sort of almost like the pressure and at the time I didn't know it was the pressure, but to mask and do freshers right. because I was the first person in my family. I had nobody else to ask these questions in terms of what do I expect, you know. Also, for context here, I was neurodivergent at this point, but this was the first turning point for me. I was like, whoa, okay, I'm not going to be able to just blag my way through this. I need to think about what I want to do, what I want to prioritize. And that was quite a lot of, I mean, I wouldn't ever say that I wasn't independent. I worked all through sixth form. I did sixth form. I had friends, you know, I did have independence, but this depth and this level of independence was completely overwhelming. It completely paralyzed me. And this is before you'd even think about going to your like introduction classes. It was, okay, I'm now meeting sort of 300 people. Some people might be my friends. Not having those sort of knowing how to navigate that was more daunting actually than the start in the classes, because the start in the classes was fine. I had color-coded notebooks, I had stationery, I had I was sorted for that side of thing. And honestly, this has come through my entire career ever since.
Well, you're speaking some deep truths there. Well, first of all, thank you for sharing. Absolutely brilliant. But also that going back to do the academic stuff, that's almost like going back to the old routines of school. You turn up, you go to a class, you then go on to the next class. It's that in-between time where we feel overwhelmed, when we're suddenly faced with so many choices, what to do with freedom. And it is that scary point of the freedom of being a university student. That freedom is there to do the not great stuff, as well as freedom to do the amazing stuff. It's how we navigate those freedoms. And this is one of the things that mentors, I know the mentors I've worked with have been absolutely excellent at. Sometimes you can sit with a mentor and say, I'm struggling with my own freedom. Give me some guidance just for today. Now, if they're a good mentor, they won't give you that guidance every day. They'll suddenly open up the freedom and allow you to make your choices. But there are sometimes we need those choices. We need those wise heads to help us make the right choice and to whittle down to the things that we need to do. So I'm assuming back in the day, mentors didn't exist in my day. I'm assuming they didn't exist in your day.
Well, interestingly, unfortunately for my situation, I was late diagnosed. So by the time, unfortunately, my undergraduate university were not very organised, unfortunately. So I fell just under the 13-week threshold to actually access DSA. So I think I had some study skills and that was it.
It is. It's that really rough thing when there's a hole in the provision, and there should be some good provision there, but not everyone can access it. I will say I think it's better than it was 10 years ago. I think it's still better than it was 5 years ago.
I think COVID, I think we've mentioned this in the past. I think the introduction of Zoom and remote platforms for this kind of thing completely changed mentoring and the sort of the landscape of how mentoring was provided for the better for students and staff to make it more accessible for all.
I think we've got a new plateau that we're going to be reaching fairly soon, which is where mentors will sort of share some of the heavy load with things like AI. I did a cool thing on Saturday. I took a photo of my fridge and then asked, what do I need to buy in the shops? And it looked at my fridge and it said, well, you probably need some milk. You definitely need some butter. I know in the past, some of your recipes have needed olives. It was brilliant. It took away a lot of those extra choices I had to make. So for anyone listening now, if you don't have the support in place, see if something like ChatGPT might just tide you over until the support actually happens.
Or we're not sponsored, but Goblin.tools.
Goblin.tools. We should get sponsored by Goblin.tools.
We should.
Yeah. Fortunately, Goblin.tools is free online, or there's a 99p app. So they probably can't afford to sponsor us, but we'll quite happily put things out there anyway. So
just a quick little example of what Goblin.tools includes. So it's got a feature on it, like Brian was talking about, the platform he's been using. So you can put in the most random items in your cupboard and fridge, as students sometimes find themselves in that predicament, sorry. And it will put the most random meal together. I've tested it with random things, but it's not an unreasonable meal. You've got formalizer. So if you're wanting to communicate something and you're not confident on how to communicate sound in a certain way, there's that option. There's also magic to do. So let's say, for example, you put in there, Mum is coming for the weekend. There's a great feature on it, and a little bit like how the Nando system works. You can
Yeah.
set your chilies to more supportive or less supportive in terms of how it breaks it down. But it can
I think that
literally,
the words that it says is, are you feeling more neurospicy or less neurospicy today?
I love that. And then it breaks it down. There's also a place for you to brainstorm, and it organizes it for, it's a great function for really not just
This is where
neurodivergent students, all students.
I actually used it on Sunday because my mum is coming to visit on Friday. And it came up with a list,
Ah,
making sure that I had done things like the hoovering, that I had bedding ready, and all that kind of stuff. Yeah,
it just takes the pressure off of
it's lovely.
the executive functioning, and there's that great thing where it makes a zing noise
Yeah.
when you tick things off. I love it.
So I'm really, really pleased that the way that some tech is going is actually being
Yeah.
very, shall we say, neurosupportive? I'm not sure that's a word, but it's that wonderful breadth of technology that's actually helping us all, which is brilliant.
Yeah.
So after the settling down, after those sort of panicky first few days, unless you've been really lucky, I used to work in a university that used to have summer schools. So students would come and stay with us for 2 or 3 nights, a couple of weeks before term started. And they'd get to meet me and the wellbeing team and maybe a couple of tutors and have a sort of fake lecture and see the campus before it started to get busy. If you're really lucky, you might have that. If not, you've moved into university, first couple of days, it is going to be chaos. Hopefully it's the lovely kind of chaos rather than the scary chaos. And then you have Freshers Week. For those who don't know, Freshers Week is where the student union in particular, rather than the university, tries to market its wares and its support. So the student union has your back. It's not official. Well, is it officially or unofficially part of the university? I don't know.
I don't know how to answer that question, Brian, I'm afraid.
Oh, it's supposed to be a group of students that run things for students that can take the university to task if the university is not doing things properly. So it should be a place you can complain to, and then you've got a whole mechanism there to fix things for you, as well as doing the social stuff as well. So joining clubs and societies, getting out there. It's worth doing your homework first to find out what clubs you might want to join. And remember, sometimes it's best to join a club 2 weeks in rather than during Freshers Week, when all the people who have just been looking for free pizza have turned up, rather than the people who want to be committed to Magic the Gathering or the Doctor Who Society or the Society for Science Fiction or the K-pop Society or whichever society you're interested in.
Brian, on the subject of science fiction, you know, my current fixation, special interest,
joy.
I don't know what to call it. Joy. I went to watch The Empire Strikes Back at our local Cineworld last night on the big screen, and I loved it. I mean, I had the ice cream, got brain free, sort of aborted that, then proceeded to eat my partner's popcorn. But I loved, and I sat to me. I thought, if I was sat here for the first time, I mean, I remember my first time watching Revenge of the Sith.
Yeah.
But I just remembered the sound, the images, and I mean, bearing in mind the prequels are more, should be technically, well, are technically more technological than the sequels, but actually, I was very impressed. It was remastered, and the last thing I did not expect was to be greeted with a life-size Vader and Boba Fett outside the cinema, which completely threw me off. I didn't know where to look.
You have to look them deep in the mask and ask them to tell you home. And
so, all of a sudden, it kind of hit me that, I don't know, what am I trying to say here? Is that sometimes surprises, Freshers Week, the opportunities that are put on, and sort of building on from your, suggestion of going 2 weeks in, sometimes things that you're not like super into, you don't have expectations of. I mean, I have super into Star Wars, but we all know that. We've talked about it several episodes. But I was not, what I was saying was I went optimistic that I was going to enjoy it. I enjoyed it, but I did not expect afterwards meeting Vader and Boba Fett. And it added a level of joy to already a good day. And what I'm translating this to is, let's say, for example, you've got an interest in Doctor Who, anime art, and perhaps a gaming society.
Yeah.
And yeah, well, hit or miss gaming, not sure if you're going to like it, but you just try. Sometimes the things you have the least expectations of, actually you enjoy the most. And I think a lot of students are like, well, I only like this, I'm only going to go to this. But sometimes it's about being that point of very early on, being, why don't you give it a try and see what you feel? And sort of
Many years ago.
encouraging that exploration.
You're right. And sometimes we can build up the things we love and kind of denigrate the things that we think will just be a bit meh. And it's the surprise of Freshers Week. Now, I'm not always a big fan of surprise, but sometimes a nice surprise can be quite nice. So it's how we put things around that to make sure that we look after ourselves. So we have this peril this chaos when you start, followed by Freshers Week and what can be some wonderful, lovely surprises. We then have the first week of lectures, which hopefully gets back to a bit of routine. The trick, and I will point this out loud to everyone, the trick with lectures is to turn up.
Yeah.
If you can, particularly if you've been out and you're a bit hungover in the morning, sometimes you'll think, oh no, it's just an introduction lecture. I will get it all on Moodle. There is something to be said about turning up even if you're feeling really rough. So if you can, please do turn up. Then,
definitely.
Yeah, then hopefully it's just week after week of going to lectures, having fun, doing your university thing until the November crash.
Yes.
Yeah.
The pinch point of the year.
Pinch point. And it is quite, not all universities, but quite a few universities have something called Reading Week, which is technically, I've always thought of it as a writing week. So if you're just going to save your reading for Reading Week, it's not great fun because you'll suddenly have essays, which is more about the writing of the essay.
Yeah.
Do the reading throughout the term, that helps an awful lot. And actually then, you've got a week where you can sit down, you've got maybe 2 essays to do, hammer them out. Hopefully you've got some notes already. Hopefully you've actually started them in advance. If not, you can crank them out. And that is usually when the November crash happens. It's when people haven't quite planned their work well enough, or there can be a bit of a perfectionist streak. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense.
This isn't the best essay I could have done, so I'm not really going to hand it in. Oh, I've handed it in late. Oh, I'm going to get penalized, cycle, rather than, yeah, this essay was a bit pants. I'm going to hand it in anyway because, 2-2, a third. It's still a pass, particularly in your first year. Better to hand in something rather than nothing.
Do you know, I actually feel it would be more productive to give students a half term, and just hear me out on this, because a lot of students view, especially students that have gone straight from further education into higher education, view reading weeks as half terms, and they're absolutely not half terms. Some universities I've even seen that have not e-lessons, but they have reading lists that they expect the student to complete, as well as writing assignments. So I think there seems to be a little bit of disparity between institutions and what they claim or perceive a reading week to be, but it absolutely is not a half term.
No. And actually, I think at least a long weekend would do people an awful good. So I have in the past suggested to students who are in the position where they can that actually they get, well, first of all, you write your essays before you have the lesson on the topic. So you've actually done some research beforehand. It means that when the topic comes in before reading week, you know some of the stuff and you're sitting there going, oh yeah, I'll add that to the essay. I'll add that to the essay.
Yeah.
And then hopefully maybe spending 3-4 days of reading week, cranking out, just polishing off the essays, getting them submitted, and then having a nice long weekend I like hiking in November if it's a nice crisp October. Yeah, November, that's a good one. But just finding something you enjoy and going
Yeah.
out, those kind of things. So the November crash, it's sometimes about the pressures of work. It does, by the end of November, you're probably going to be all right. And then through December, there's lots of interesting things to do as we run up to Christmas. And then you get to come home for a bit. Have you come across the issue of parental infantilization?
Yes.
Yes. Oh, we have to say this out loud. Parents, you're lovely, but your kids are now growing up at university.
And they do have work to do.
Yeah.
Unless they're extremely disciplined and extremely productive and have done everything, tied everything up, which is going to be a minority.
Yeah.
Irrespective of neurotype. Half terms are not a thing when you're at university, sadly. Christmas breaks are not a Christmas break. Most students plan for a 5-day break around the Christmas, Christmas Day, Boxing Day, Christmas Eve. And then they're straight back on the saddle because the beginning of January, they've got a 24-hour exam, or they've got a group work to submit, or they've got a literature review to submit. So I think what's
I
missed
miss
is that
traditional Christmases, which used to be 12 days long. 12 days of feasting and sat in front of a fire and wrapped up in a blanket. This was particularly in the formative times of universities, the old sort of 18th century concept that we have of the Oxfords and Cambridges and those old institutions. They would have 12-day Christmas celebrations until this sort of horrible having to work all the time came along.
Yeah, I think there's something to be said, but I feel like, I don't know. I feel like it would be more beneficial to give students that time to switch off, because I think, people that are in employment can book annual leave. Students don't really. And I think whilst, yes, COVID came, yes, there have been advancements in technology, yes, things are more accessible, but there's also the caveat that like in a professional capacity, you're on demand 24/7. It's almost sort of this culture is expected, well, you've got all the resources available to you 24/7. Why haven't you got on with it? And it's not said out loud, but it's kind of there, that culture.
Yeah. If only we could all decide together that we were all going to take a nice big break off and say it out loud and actually do it, that would be lovely. So I think that's particularly important, to have that proper break over the Christmas period because of the January abyss, where it starts to get cold, it starts to get miserable. Seasonal acute depression is a thing, but I think also that the winter gloomies happen to us all. It doesn't have to be full diagnostic criteria blown. It is hard to get yourself up, to get yourself going, but sometimes spring starts to come in and then you get this wonderful period of growth. That sort of February, March, sometimes into April if you're lucky, that time where you kind of work out who you are.
Yeah,
that happens almost every year. Brilliant. Even when you get to my kind of age, I do like that sort of spring growth that I feel in myself.
It's late February, early March for me, when the snowdrops come up.
Oh, it's beautiful, isn't it? And it's about really enjoying that kind of time. And then
definitely.
We would be remiss if we didn't say anything about exam worries. Do you ever recommend a start date for revision?
Yes.
Yep.
That's realistic.
Yeah.
In the vein of what we've just been talking about, yes, students need a break. And I often will say, depending on the situation, because obviously every institution's different, but generally speaking, students might have anywhere between 2 and up to, some examples, 5 weeks off at Christmas.
Yeah.
If the student's in a position where, and this is where study skills and mentoring does cross over, but there is time management in both roles. If the student's in a position where they've got 3 weeks off, but prior to Christmas, at the beginning of December or the first week of December, start the revision process then, give yourself time off, and then come back to it with fresh eyes. If the student's not in that situation, give yourself the Christmas period off, then pick up the revision. But I find that a lot of my students struggle with the lack of routine, the lack of the expectations and the purpose each day. So actually sort of establishing and working with your mentee to get a revision timetable and routine in place quite often is helpful, because students are like, oh, well, I've had Christmas and I've kind of got out of the swing of it.
Yeah.
So I think there's lots of different situations. I find some students thrive. Parents have gone back to work, siblings have gone back to school. Some students thrive having the house to themselves, no distractions,
Oh, isn't
no
that lovely?
societies to go to.
Yeah.
So they do really maintain that routine. For other students who completely collapse without other people around them, it's a really tricky and lonely time.
Tricky one. When it comes to creating the routine itself, there is something to be said for spacing. So the optimal spacing for coming back to subjects once you've already learned them is actually every 2 weeks. So if you are fortunate enough or unfortunate enough to have 10 exams, then you'd have 5 days in a week, 1 week, 5 days a week in the next week. And then you sort of repeat the pattern again of only about half an hour to an hour every day of sort of additional top up. And that is prime recall. If you're doing it, if you're looking for a structure, a sort of 10-day structure before you come back and sort of repeat the topic, repeat the topics. That's a good way forward.
Yeah, and I have a similar thing where I talk to students about working with their study skills and suggest working through it systematically and going through a process of elimination. And I often say, if you can't teach me or your mum or somebody else that knowledge, you need to go back over it. And some students find that really helpful. Rather than revising the things they do know, revise the things they don't know, and then kind of do a little check, a little roundup at the end. And that's quite a useful strategy to recommend for students, especially if there are people at home or, you know, flatmates or housemates around to help them with that.
And also remember, if you've learnt it right the first time around and you've looked at it and you think, actually, there's no holes in it, you don't need to be revising that one.
No, exactly.
You know it, you know it. But the best revision is learning it the first time round.
Yeah.
So if you are finding yourself, and I know there are a handful of students that do, that sort of bimble through revision, not doing that much and maybe trying to make it more of a performative art than real revision itself. And then they do really, really well in the exams. If it works for you, keep on doing what you're doing. Yeah. So
I certainly fell into that category as a student, especially before Spanish exams.
Oh. So this is where I'm quite open about this. In my first year at university back in 1994, there was one particular topic that I only got 38% in, and so I should have failed and been thrown out. Luckily, my supervisors were lovely, my tutors were lovely, and I didn't even do a resit because they just let me get on to the next year. But actually, sometimes I think that was what I needed. I needed to have done a big crunch and a bit of a fail so that I started to work the next year. So I couldn't beat myself up too much about it.
That was like me, Brian, talking about expectations. I'd gone from high flying, getting good grades all through sixth form, always being praised. I remember my first essay. Bearing in mind, my sixth form, no sixth forms, that from my experience, have prepared students for Harvard. And a third was slapped in front of me. And I remember, this is not going to happen again. Unfortunately, my perfectionism took over and the rest was history. But I remember that humbling moment. Here's your assignment. You've got work to do. And I remember that kind of turned my approach very quickly. All of a sudden,
and I wouldn't
like to say a cockiness, but like this self-assurance was challenged a little bit, which pushed me further. So I can totally relate to that.
But I say this as a researcher, somebody who's gone through all the stages of education and is now very sure that he doesn't know stuff. Not knowing stuff is the ultimate gain of all our studies. It's where we end up at the end. We end up to a place where all the known stuff is there already, and we're looking at the unknown stuff. And that humbling moment, that humility that we create when things go wrong, is actually a sign of a good academic, knowing that you don't know stuff. And that's a really hard lesson to learn. Hopefully, you can do it at universities. We've had a big, long chat, this great big arc through the different types, different times of university. And it ends us up with the summer holidays. Now, for lots of students, well, lots, for 2/3 of students, you'll hopefully be coming back next year. But a third of them will be moving on to jobs and things.
Yeah.
Lucy, any advice to those third-year students in the ebb and flow of the mentoring year, of mentors, about how we take that next step into that flourishing employability?
First of all, signpost, signpost, signpost.
Yeah.
Access to work.
Yes. Yes.
You know, look at the transferable skills. Look at, okay, what sort of direction that final year of you supporting that student. It's not you making decisions for them.
Yep.
It's you being that guiding hand in the process of that transition of transitioning out of higher education into the workplace. And I think access to work is just not spoken about enough, and it's really important. It is.
So for those who are unaware, access to work is government funding that's given to the employer for access needs. Does that sound about right?
Yeah.
How do you actually access it when you start a job?
So there is actually, if you go on the Access to Work website, which is a government website, you can have interview support, which is the first thing. You can have somebody advocate, which is a really great resource. But once you've secured a job, or if you've registered as self-employed, there are some technicalities if you register self-employed. But if you are employed, you are eligible, because usually you have to send evidence of your condition, whether that be a mental health, a physical condition, or disability. All types of conditions. As long as you can evidence it, you can then send that off to Access to Work. There's an online application form you have to fill out. And then what happens, very similarly to the needs assessment you would have had during DSA, you do then have a needs assessment in a similar style, where you'll be asked questions about your job, your role, what will be expected of you, what sort of things do you find difficult, and then they'll go through a range of different things that the needs assessment will provide. Do you think this might help? Or you'll go through, explore lots of different resources, and
you might end up with a work mentor quite similar to that.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. But there's all sorts of types of resources and support that can be put in for you. And then once that needs assessment has happened, usually you'll be given a list of things that you've been awarded. And similarly to DSA, you then ring up the suppliers or find your own suppliers for certain items. Your workplace, it's dependent on how the scale of the workplace, but it's all on the website as you go through. But usually your workplace purchase the item, and then the fund reimburses them, or sometimes you put some of the stuff, the suppliers directly invoice. Access to Work is all, it's all as you go through that process, it's all that information is available to you. But I think it's an absolutely great resource. You can sometimes have, for example, an ADHD work coach. There's support like a job aid, job coach. It's a really great package that's offered.
Not many students know this when they're going into the workforce. So there you go. That's the top tip in that bit of the ebb and flow of the year for mentors, preparing students for the workplace, actually furnishing with the information that they need so that they can put together their own packages of support now that they've got and graduated. And that's the last thing, graduations. I love me a good graduation. I have on many years sort of snuck into graduation at the back, met parents, said I'm incredibly proud of the students that have gone through. I've got a huge collection of selfies that as a mentor I managed to take. And so if you're a mentor, I do highly recommend going, if you're ever at that kind of thing, if you go into the Eden Ravencroft or whoever's doing the gowns, and you say, hi, I'm a member of the wellbeing staff, can I borrow a gown just so that I can go and congratulate students I've been working with? They're usually very happy to give you a gown. And once you've got a gown on, nobody stops you at any of the things, and you can usually grab free champagne. There's things I learn.
Things you learn.
It is. And that moment of celebration, I think, is a really good way of us to wrap up at the end there. So thank you, Lucy.
Thank you, Brian.
If you have questions, we love to hear them at neuromentoringpodcast@gmail.com.
This has been Neuromentoring. Be
Be
brilliant.
brilliant.